Thank you, Mr. Kimson, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you'll excuse me speaking, sitting down. Is my voice going to carry all right? You can hear. Well, I'm going to start this because I haven't thought in the slightest what I'm going to say. My sister said to me, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I went to the Rhodesian Ridgebacks and talked to them about a week ago, and I got up and said, 'I know nothing about Rhodesian Ridgebacks, now let's have coffee.'" And I feel very like saying that to do when I see so many experts sitting around me. So I'm going to kick off with Warner Hill's saying, which you will have heard many times, but which wants repeating over and over and over again, and have it as your motto. If a dog is badly made and it works well, it is working well in spite of being badly made and not because of it. And that is a most absolutely marvellous thing to say. And when there was an article in the Shooting Times about 3 weeks ago, and Mr. Moxon was quoting and saying how springers could work with the most abominable fronts, and it didn't matter, and that field trial champion Temple Grafton Jason had a shocking front, and look what a marvellous worker he was, I felt like writing and saying, yes, he's a marvellous worker, because he is, but it's courage. He's doing it in spite of every joint meeting wrong, and every muscle having a wrong strain put on it, and every toe being skew-whipped because his front is not right. And that is what happens. We have working cockers, we try and get their fronts right, we can't, unfortunately, and we know that they are working well on their courage and their will to work and their spirit, and not because their fronts are wrong. So now, to get onto the Labrador, because most people here will be Labradors, we have 3 Labradors. We have the water dog, and it's a great sadness to me that when they named the Labrador, that they didn't call it the Labrador Water Retriever. It's a mouthful, but it would have been a good name because we forget that the dog is a water dog. Its job was water work. Its job still is water work, and we've adopted it and adapted it for different works. But in many countries that we sell our puppies to, and we should never forget this, they expect that dog to work in water very largely. And if you sell a dog to Canada, it will be working in water in terrible frost, in cold water, hours at a time. And we ought to remember that, both when we breed and when we judge. The Labrador is a water dog, even though in this country it may not now be its first job. So that is the Labrador as a water dog. The next thing is the Labrador as a Labrador. Now here is a difficult thing, because this is type. And however much you have a standard, the one thing it cannot describe is type. You've got to have type in your head. And perhaps type varies a little from country to country. It varies a little from county to county. The Labrador is a manufactured dog. It has many crosses in it of alien breeds. It even gets crosses in it now of alien breeds by mistake. Remember Mrs. Wormel's chow? That wasn't a fable. She had a half-bred chow. Was believed to be a Labrador until it turned into a chow. Then we found out the awful history. I'll tell you that story sometime. And therefore we do have things crossed in by mistake. Mrs. Wormel realized the dogs were never bred from that litter. But the fact remained that that dog was trained as a Labrador and run in trials as Labrador and shown as Labrador by a chow. So that is the kind of thing that can slip in if you don't watch. So that my criterion of Labrador type is a very simple one. It must look like a Labrador. And it's absolutely simple. It mustn't look like a Foxhound. It mustn't look like a pointer. The danger at the moment, it mustn't look like a golden retriever. Now that is a very big danger. Pointers, you get unmanageability. It's an outward bound dog. Its horizon is 300 yards away. its hind legs make it gallop because they can't help galloping. Its head is held too high, its elbow is angulated for a high head carriage, and you don't want it in a Labrador, and we used to get it. And beside that, we've always got a very, very short coat. Then the Foxhound cross. This is all in my lifetime. And the Foxhounds came in deliberately. I know where they came, I know the pack that was used. Anything that looked like a Foxhound went to the Foxhound pack. Anything that looked like a Labrador stayed in the Labrador breed. This was immediately during the end of the last war, when there'd been a hiatus and people were improving anything they'd got, and some people knew how to improve them. And they improved them with what came in, arrogance. Arrogance, and the dogs, when you went to judge them, instead of looking at you like a Labrador should, when you put your hands down, they did that with the proudest, most arrogant expression. Now that got into the breed very badly, so that we had championship show judges writing in their critiques, and I've cut them out and kept them, correct, arrogant expression. Now that was shocking, because who wants a serving dog, a servant, who is arrogant, and who won't look you in the face, and who turns its head away when it brings the bird? It's absolutely wrong. And the other terrible fault we got in there was that they were very fastidious, this particular line, and it got right through the breed at one time, and they did not like opening their mouths in dirty water. I can't blame them. I don't like opening my mouth in dirty water, and I don't intend to, which is why I have a dog, but I expect my dog. And the happy day came when one of this particular strain went out to a pheasant in a very muddy river. Well, it wasn't muddy, it was black with coal dust in Durham, in a field trial. And there was its hen pheasant, dead, being moved very slowly down the river, very sluggish river. And this particular dog went out and it swam round and round and round that bird. It could not bring itself to open its mouth to pick it. And it came back. Well, it was called back. And field trial, champion, what Stanwell Balladuff Robin, show dog, was sent next. He went straight out and got it. There's nothing wrong with that bird, he just picked it. By that time it had very nearly sunk and there was only that much of its back. It was a hen pheasant, just a little bit showing, but he did a very good job. The next trial we ran at was also in Northumberland and Durham, and I was running my old carry, and there was a muddy river, a muddy pond, with only water just in the centre of the pond, so that you had a long reach of mud to cross. And it was very muddy water, and there were duck in it. And there was a duck shot down into there, and you couldn't cross the mud, because the mud was too deep. You had to run across a plank that was lying on the mud. And this same dog ran out, across the plank, got into the water, swam out to his duck, and refused to pick it. And I was lucky that time, because I was following with my bitch Carrie. And she went along the plank and picked the bird, and we had a good run, and we won the stake. But that was the Foxhound. It was fastidious and it was arrogant. Now the next thing that happened was that somebody realized this, and they quietly moved in a flat coat. Now that did a power of good. But we had a flat coat influence. One of the reasons why I hate a black eye in a Labrador was that was brought in. We brought in narrow heads, flat coat eyes, flat coat shaped eyes, and we had a lot of feathering. And I remember Lady Hillwood hanging over the banisters with me at Crufts, over the gallery, and saying, "Since when have we had to cut the feathering off our buttocks and tails with scissors?" And we looked down into the ring and you could see. Well, now then that was got out, because the Labrador breeders are so sensible they can get these things out. It took some years, and we left the good points in. We lost the arrogance, we lost the hardness, and we got dogs that would retrieve nicely again and were nice to deal with and so on. But they had flat coat trays, and we got them in. But they didn't do us any very great harm. Now the next thing that came in, and I don't know where it came in, and I could never get Warner Hill to tell me, but he knew, was that the trial people introduced Greyhound. And they introduced Greyhound purely to get the speed. Now that influence is still with us, and if you look at the trial Labradors, you'll see that a lot of them have very, very beautiful necks and shoulders, marvellous necks, way, way beyond our reach of neck, really beautiful necks and shoulders. Then they have the deep body, then the telltale arch over the loin. And that is the most difficult thing to breed out, to get the field trial arch out of the loin. And that was the Greyhound. And then they have very, very long thin tails, and they have single coats. So again, we'd got that in. And then the next thing was that these were flashing about over the top of the roots, tremendous speed. And one field trial person in Scotland said, right, I'll stop this. And she introduced Border Collie. I cannot tell you, it's been too And there was a marvellous kennel of sort of Greyhound, Labrador, Border Collies. And they were lovely little dogs. They had ears like that. And if you looked at them, they went flat to the ground like that. And I can remember her bringing a team of them to Lillimere. And I mean, they were almost as useless as the Greyhounds, because you'd only got to look at them and they were down, you know. But however, it all went into the field trial blood. So I'm warning you, if you use field trial lines, you get their virtues, you get their faults. But worse still, you get their diseases. And this is why I am so against any Labrador looking like anything, or particularly feeling like anything when you judge it that isn't a Labrador. Because you get in other breeds and you will get in diseases, and you'll get their diseases in. So therefore, my first Labrador has been a water dog. My second Labrador, for heaven's sake, let it be a Labrador, and let it look like a Labrador, behave like a Labrador, and feel like a Labrador, and work like a Labrador. Now then, the last dog that I'm mentioning is not so much Labrador as dog, and I'm including the word bitch in when I say dog. I don't mean male, I mean canine. And that is the dog that is absolutely the most perfectly made dog you've ever seen, and doesn't look like a Labrador and isn't one. Now this is a very, very difficult thing when you meet them judging. What you do, I can remember old Mrs. Charlesworth, the veteran golden retriever lady, coming, she used to stay with us a lot, coming back from judging a show, which was the Royal Larynx. And she said, I said, what did you do in Labradors? Because she was a golden retriever breeder. She said, I put up a marvellous dog. One of the best dogs I've ever put up. That was a marvellous dog. It wasn't a Labrador, I don't know what it was, but I gave it best in show. And so I said, well, why did you give it best in show? It wasn't a Labrador, it was meant to be one. And she said, it was the most marvellously made dog. And she said, I could not go past it. And she said, it's up to you Labrador breeders to whether they're Labradors. She said, I'm an all-round judge, and I put up the best dog. So now you have three different things there. And when it comes to the judging, you've got to make the decision. And nobody can say whether you're right or wrong. I'm not going to say Mrs. Charlesworth was wrong. She was probably right. I'm not going to say the person who puts up dear old... one famous occasion when a Labrador went best in show at Welks, perhaps I'd better not mention names, but a certain judge put up a lovely, dear old, sloppy, lovely old pram dog, which was a Labrador. And when all the Labrador people tacked him afterward and said, well, we love the old dog, but why ever did you put him to best in show? I can remember, I think it was Min Kinsella saying, I think it reminded him of his old dog Tray in the nursery. And I always thought of that because his old dog Tray was exactly what it did remind you of. And it was a lovely old Labrador, but it was an old slop pot and not made at all. It hadn't any confirmation, so what do you do? It's up to you. You can't say Mrs. Charlesworth was wrong because she put up the best dog in the show. You can't say that it was actually Lord North-Esk was wrong because he put up dear old dog Tray. That was what he thought was the best, and what he liked, and it was a lovely Labrador. So there you are. But now, we've got onto the confirmation, and the judging of the confirmation. Now, first of all, I do wish that everybody in this room, I may be wrong about this, I'm old-fashioned, would remember that the Labrador is a cold, wet weather dog, and that it is a water dog. and that it should be able to go out duck flighting in January in bitter, bitter weather, sitting at the bottom of a cut in the sand with water up to its belly or even up to its neck, the tide coming in or out, and it has to sit there while the duck flighting is on, and it is cold and it is wet, and the dog must be able to stand it. So therefore, even if you're not doing that, please remember that that is the job of a Labrador. And they should have a proper coat. And it should coat them all over. And time again in the show ring, and I have no doubt here that there'll be one or two people who may be showing dogs like this or may have judged dogs like this and put them up. They are half-coated. They have a hard ripple like a table runner down their backs, very, very hard hair, and they have nothing else. Just, I don't know what it is, it's sort of fluff on their flanks. And that is not a Labrador coat. The Labrador coat should cover it all over to the same depth and be dense. But they're very, very difficult to find now. But I do beg you to remember that you may sell your puppy to Canada. You may sell it to a grouse moor, and they cannot stand it. They are absolutely shivering by the end of the day on a grouse moor. You can't really. Well, they die. I'll tell you what they die of. They die of kidney disease, particularly the dogs, and they die when they're about 6, because they have no protection. So therefore, when you're judging, you have to remember that they must be Labradors, but they've also got to have the confirmation for the job. And if you know what the job is, and I'm going to say, in case there's anybody in this room belonging to other breeds who doesn't know what a Labrador's job is, a Labrador's job is not to hunt in front of you, flushing rabbits, flushing pheasants, however good. It is not to be a guide dog for the blind. It is not to be a dog for finding drugs or any of these useful things, well, our treasurer today has just said that his dog this afternoon found a dead body, a man. That's not its job. It was very nice of it to do it. And no doubt has got him into a lot of trouble, and he's jolly lucky he isn't in the police station even now. But if he had found it later in the afternoon, he would have been. As it was, he got the police station over before he came here. But it is not its job. Its job is to sit or walk at heel until told to go. And it's only told to go either at the end of the drive or when the bird comes down, if you're in a duck, what the Americans call a blind, or sitting at the bottom of a creek, and you want it to go, it shouldn't run in. You should say, right, I see that goose is going to escape, right, go. Well, it's very easy to sit here and say it, it's very difficult to do, but that is its job. Then, when the bird is down, the dog is supposed to go out and to get the scent, not 300 yards away like a pointer, not grovelling like a spaniel with all its elbows out. It's supposed to get a breast-high scent from a reasonable distance and then be able to put its head down, follow the scent without difficulty. In other words, it mustn't have wrong shoulder, it must have correct angulation, and then it picks its bird up. And it may have a very heavy thing to pick. And it's supposed to have the lift and the shoulder to take it. And for that, you need a dog bred on exactly classical lines. And the classical line is a level back, not a rake. A level back. Any retrieving dog that has to also mark should have a level back. It should then have a laid back shoulder. It should have a longer back to its neck than its throat line, and this is where we show judges are so naughty. But time and again we put up the dog that has the throat line and it has that much back to its neck, and I measure them. And it shouldn't be that. It should have an 11-inch back to its neck and a 4-inch throat line, not a 4-inch throat and not an 11-inch throat and a 4-inch. If it was a horse, it would be putting its ear in your mouth. I know, because I've ridden horses that put their ears in my mouth. And that's because it had a rotten short back to its neck and a great windpipe. And it is very dangerous for a Labrador to have that enormous exposed windpipe. They should have a shorter throat line and a long back. And then when they pick the bird, it stands to reason that they go over, and the long line is on the top and the short line is underneath. Now the shoulder should be laid back, and this is very important too. In a pointer and setter, they have the laid back shoulder, fair enough. But they don't have the classical right angle at the point of the shoulder. They are over-angulated. Their shoulder is laid back like that, and their leg is like that, and that is an open angle. It isn't the right angle. That is the Labrador. That goes back. The head's here. That goes back like that, the shoulder, to the point of the shoulder. That is laid back, and you have a right angle there. But the pointer, no, it's like that, as is the Foxhound, because they are actually bred so that it is difficult for them to put the head down. You want a Foxhound to hunt on a breast-high scent. And so he is bred like a pointer with an open angle at the elbow and at the point of the shoulder. The layback is all right, but the angle is wrong, and we want the right angle or thereabouts, give or take a few degrees. And if you have a laid-back shoulder and a right angle there, level back, then your leg, your foreleg, comes back under the girth. It's not under the ear, and neither is it straight under the point of the shoulder. It is back, and it comes, the elbow is under the girth, so that you have an exact angulation that the dog can as easily mark the bird when he's walking, because it's easy for him to have his head up. He can get a scent within a reasonable distance, possibly half the length of this room, and then put his head down. And he can get his head down perfectly easily without having to put his elbow out like a foxhound does. So therefore you've got a perfect mechanism there. And he must have that long line on top of his neck to pick his bird. He then picks his bird, which takes a lot of strength, and gets it back onto the layback of his shoulders, and he's carrying it on the layback of his shoulders. So if you have the classical front, that is exactly right for a Labrador, a Golden, a flat coat, a Curly, a Ches, but it isn't right for a pointer and setter, and it isn't right for a Foxhound. They have their own fronts, slightly open. Now we come to the Spaniels. The Spaniel's job is to grovel about on the ground. He has to crest with his nose down, and so therefore he is over-angulated. And his shoulder is slightly concertinaed, so that he has less than a right angle at the point of the shoulder, and he has a more open angle at the elbow. And that is so that he can grovel and get down and shovel about. And he has to pick a thing which is very, very much heavier in proportion to his weight, particularly a cocker who has to pick a hare. And they do it because they can get their heads underneath. They don't pick them up like a show cocker does. And this is why the show cockers are very useless for work. They are over their legs, and they're not angulated properly for a working cocker. They've more or less got a Labrador's angulation. And when they try and put their heads down, they're trying to lift a very heavy weight like that. And they can't do it. It's too heavy for them. And so with that working angulation, they can concertina all their angles in their shoulders, and they come under their bird like that. And before you can say Jack Robinson, the hair is across their shoulders, and they've got the weight back on the shoulder blade. So the angulation is the most important thing. And if anybody says to you, a shoulder is just one of those things, it isn't. It is absolutely important in a working dog. And you must cut your cloth to suit your suit. In other words, you must breed your shoulder to suit your work. And that is to get a breast-high scent the length of this room, to then be able to put your nose down without any difficulty and to take from the fall to the bird and then pick it up and return at speed with it up. And that is the Labrador's job. Now then, because you've wanted this being able to get down as easily as up and being able to get up as easily as down, you have to have a level back. And if you have a level back, it very rarely stands to reason that your angulation will be right behind. And if your angulation isn't right behind, then you can be jolly sure the shoulder's wrong. And whichever you do, if you have an over-angulated shoulder with open angles, like a pointer and setter, I'm citing one of my own dogs now. I had a lovely dog called Tarmac who got as far as reserve CCs, but he was too big to win a CC ever. He was huge. over 24 inches. But he was a lovely, lovely dog and a very good worker. But I can cite him because he was wrongly made. He had a marvellous layback of shoulder. He then had a raked back. And the consequence was that he was over-angulated behind, so that he had too much stifle and too much hock, too long a hock, and it was too far behind him. And that is what happens when you get a raked back. Now, that was the most frightful inconvenience to him when he was swimming, because he swam like a pointer. And instead of, he was all right once he got the bird in his mouth, but when he hadn't got the bird in his mouth, the fact that he hadn't got a level back and that he had over-angulated hind legs because of the fact that the rake had pressed them down, he had difficulty in a real good water work, and so therefore I know from experience that is not a good thing. And if you are ever tempted into putting up a champion because it has a lovely rake, just remember that it's not meant to have, it's meant to have a level back. I can remember once judging a champion, and he was a very nice dog, and he had quite a lot of tickets, and I looked at him from behind, standing directly behind him, and I looked up his back, and I thought, he'd got a very strong back, very strong ribs, good loin, and I thought it's exactly looking up one of those ramps that reach up from the beach to the promenade, because you looked right up him. I mean, he walked up him like the Queen walking up the Great Wall. And I mean, it is not right, because he was angulated wrong behind. And I'm sure he would have had great difficulty with his swimming, that dog, just as my tarmac did. And with my tarmac, I remember sitting at a show in Scotland, and a lady saying to me, "It's time I was judging. I know I'm a good judge, and I simply love your tarmac. He's got such a gorgeous rake from his head to his tail," and I thought, nobody was listening, because he had. I mean, you couldn't hide it. You can see it in his photos. And so, therefore, you want this level back. Now, then, another place where I think is important, and where we are getting right again, because there's one very clever thing about the Labrador breeders, and over all the years I've been in Labradors, they can correct quietly, and these things disappear. And at one time, because we had a craze for very, very short backs, which they were mistaking for short coupling, because a short back is not short coupled. The word short couple means the loin. And because they thought they must have very short backs, they were absolutely cramming their dogs so close together that they had nowhere to put their feet when they ran, because they were cramming. And they had a very short line, now this is my point, from the point of the hip to the point of the buttock. They had no rumps whatsoever. And I'm quite certain that for work, particularly swimming, you must have a decent balanced length from the point of the hip to the point of the buttock. But people don't seem to judge that, but obviously the Labrador people did realize they'd gone wrong there, because they've got that right again, and you'd never see it. Well, now, if you've got your back line right, then you're going to have your angulation just about right. And it is as well to remember again that a Labrador is not meant to stand with its legs out behind it like a pointer setter. They're meant to stand just more or less under the point of the buttock. In other words, the dog is standing slightly over his leg, and he mustn't stand sickle hocked with his feet too far forward. He mustn't stand like a ponton setter with it raked up behind, because that'll rake his back line. It means he's over-angulated. And a very important point, which I don't think many people seem to take much notice of, but which is important, that for a perfectly balanced dog, balanced on its legs, the bone for which we have no name in dogs, which shows that we don't take any notice of it whatsoever, but which in a horse is called the cannon bones, from the hock to the ground, some people call it a short hock. That is absolutely wrong. The hock is the actual angle of the joint. And the cannon bone drops from the hock to the foot. And when the dog is standing in its perfectly good show position, with its nice bend of stifle and its hock nicely let down, if it's standing balanced and right, it should stand with the cannon bone at exact right angles to the ground, not stretched out back, not sickle underneath. Now, Bridget Docking, who knew a lot, she was very, very keen on that. And when she was judging, I've never forgotten this, that she used to take the lead out of your hand. And she used to just manipulate the dog as though it was a polo pony to see what that bone did, the cannon bone. And she'd just test the dog to see if it was sickle hocked or if it was too far out behind or if it fell absolutely true, so that it stood in the centre of its feet and neither on its toes nor its heels. The cannon bone. And she'd just test the dog to see if it was sickle hocked or if it was too far out behind or if it fell absolutely true, so that it stood in the centre of its feet and neither on its toes nor its heels. And one day a novice said, "Don't you do that to my dog," and hit her in the face, slapped her across the face. Bridget Docking slapped Bridget Docking across the face. And Bridget Docking never did it again. And I said to her, "It's very, very sad that you don't do this, because it was one of the absolutely telling tests." And she said, "I'll never touch another person's lead when I'm judging." And she never did. It was one of the most awful things I've ever seen, and it was an absolute green novice. I don't know what she was thinking of. And so that was a test which went out of the window. But if that dog drops its hock correctly, then it is standing absolutely correctly on its feet, and you're less likely to have foot trouble. So therefore you've got the dog, in that case, if you've got your angulation right and your level back, you've got a balanced dog standing on its feet correctly, with its weight very, very slightly on its hocks, only very, very slightly. And it should stand in a position, and this is what Bridget Docking was judging, that it can jump in any direction immediately. It can either jump forwards, back, or to either side, because it's slightly on its hocks, and any horseman will know that you must not turn a horse on its forehand. Just occasionally, I've been asked to handle a dog in a challenge, somebody's dog they've had two in, and very often it absolutely amazes me that those dogs stand on their forehand and yet they've got as far as the challenge. And you can't turn them without actually tipping their forelegs. If you want to move their feet, you have to do it with your toe. You can't do it with the lead like you can with a dog that's balanced properly, like Bridget Docking was testing for. But if they stand just in that balanced position so that they could take off in any direction, you're much less likely to have joint trouble in later life, and you won't have foot trouble. You won't have toe trouble. Those to me are the salient points of a Labrador's conformation. You must have the coat. You must be coated right over even the testicles and the inside of the thighs. You want to be coated right over with the same coat all over, and it must be dense. You want the nice balanced dog with the correct back line, very particularly the correct shoulder, and then you'll get the correct hindquarters, standing correctly on its feet. And then you get a Labrador which can do absolutely any job. And having said all that, you've got your Labrador, and now besides that, as we know, it has to have a tender mouth, the ability to retrieve, the ability to mark, and 1,000 other things that you have in field trials, and it's like trying to get your football pools right. You never do it, but we try, and that's what I'm going to say. That's it. Yes, I'm going to... What is the drill? I thought that...
Well, ladies and gentlemen...
Ha, ha, ha. You know. That was the most successful evening I've ever spoken to. I went and spoke to the Golden Retrievers the other day, and before we got halfway through, we were telling ghost stories. We had a scintillating evening, didn't we?
I meant to mention when I introduced Mrs. Roslin, she is almost as large as Golden Retriever shoulders as you probably read. in the dog world.
Now that has aged you.
It has.
So the very old can remember that. Young ladies like Carol weren't even born then. Well, that's why I said if anybody says to you that shoulders are just one of those things, because that lady said to me, shoulders are just one of those things. I don't mind at all. I'd do anything like that. Well, I think it's a good thing while they're still red hot, isn't it? Because otherwise, once we've had our supper, we forget.
Well, ladies and gentlemen.
You know what I was asked when I spoke to one society, and they said, any questions? And a man who'd been sitting there glaring at me throughout said, do you believe in God? Shaking the God, I don't question to be asked. So don't anybody ask that, please.
Earlier on, you touched on a point, and you said we were getting like golden retrievers. What do you mean? Because I've already just sent some notes in on a judging I did.
Well,
I mentioned that myself, so I wondered what your point was.
And you're going to be in trouble again.
yes, I'm going to be in trouble again. I think that we have had in the fairly recent past, how long is the fairly recent past? 20 years. We had one or two Goldens came into the breed, and they are a cross I'm frightened of. They have some very good things. They always have tender mouths. You very seldom